I mean, we have an executive, and we have a judicial, and then a legislative, and then smoke bomb!
Because
The political landscape in the United States has always been a complex interplay of power, morality, and public perception. At the heart of this dynamic are the three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative, designed to maintain checks and balances. Yet, recent events surrounding President Joe Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden, have thrown a metaphorical smoke bomb into this delicate equilibrium, exposing contradictions and sparking widespread debate. This saga, punctuated by sharp critiques from unexpected quarters, such as comedian and former Daily Show host Jon Stewart, has revealed layers of hypocrisy, media complicity, and a profound erosion of public trust. What unfolded was not just a family matter, but a seismic event that challenged the credibility of an administration and its allies, leaving many Americans questioning the integrity of the justice system and the principles it claims to uphold. The Biden administration has long positioned itself as a defender of the rule of law, a beacon of integrity in contrast to its political adversaries. Democrats, with Biden at the helm, have consistently branded themselves as the party of accountability, justice, and moral clarity. This narrative has been a cornerstone of their political identity, particularly in an era marked by polarization and distrust in institutions. However, the decision to pardon Hunter Biden, despite years of legal controversies and investigations, shattered this carefully crafted image. The pardon, announced with little forewarning, sent shockwaves through the political spectrum, prompting reactions ranging from outrage to disillusionment. For many, it was not just a personal act of fatherly protection, but a betrayal of the very principles Biden had vowed to uphold. Hunter Biden's legal troubles have been a persistent shadow over his father's presidency. From allegations of financial misconduct to issues involving substance abuse, his actions have drawn scrutiny from both political opponents and the media. Yet, throughout these challenges, President Biden maintained a public stance of respect for the judicial process. In multiple statements, he emphasized that he would abide by the jury's verdict, regardless of the outcome. "I'm not going to do anything. I will abide by the jury's decision, and I will not pardon him," Biden declared when asked about the possibility of intervening in his son's case. This commitment was echoed in response to direct questions about accepting the jury's verdict, to which he responded affirmatively. These assurances were not merely offhand remarks, but deliberate pledges to the American public, reinforcing the administration's dedication to the rule of law. When the jury delivered a guilty verdict, however, the narrative shifted dramatically. Rather than honoring his promise, Biden issued a pardon, effectively nullifying the judicial outcome. This decision was not a quiet, discreet act, but a bold move that invited intense scrutiny. The pardon covered not only the specific charges for which Hunter was convicted, but also any potential crimes he may have committed over an 11-year period, a scope that raised eyebrows and fueled speculation about the extent of the administration's concerns. The sweeping nature of the pardon suggested that there might be more at stake than a single legal case, prompting questions about what the administration was seeking to conceal. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Cabinet members, press, secretaries, and spokespeople were thrust into a defensive posture, struggling to justify the president's actions. Press conferences became exercises in evasion, with officials dodging questions or offering vague, jargon-laden responses that failed to address the core issue. This was not leadership, but damage control, a frantic attempt to mitigate the political damage. The administration's allies in the media, particularly outlets like MSNBC, leapt into action, framing the pardon as an act of paternal love rather than a political maneuver. They highlighted Biden's personal tragedies, the loss of 2 children, and portrayed the pardon as a desperate effort to protect his only surviving son. This emotional appeal was a calculated move, designed to deflect criticism and garner sympathy. Yet, the public was not so easily swayed. The attempt to cloak the pardon in familial devotion fell flat, as many saw it for what it was: a blatant contradiction of Biden's earlier promises. The administration's pivot from "no one is above the law" to insinuations that the judicial process was unfair or overly punitive was jarring. This was not the principled stance of a leader committed to justice, but the opportunistic maneuvering of a politician protecting his own. The hypocrisy was palpable, and it eroded the administration's credibility in the eyes of a public already weary of elitism and double standards. Jon Stewart, a figure long associated with liberal causes, emerged as an unlikely critic of this debacle. Known for his incisive commentary and willingness to call out hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle, Stewart did not hold back. His critique was not just a roast, but a devastating indictment of the Democratic Party's moral posturing. For years, Stewart had defended the party's values, but the pardon was a bridge too far. He saw it as a betrayal of the ideals Democrats had claimed to champion: truth, transparency, and accountability. On air, he skewered the administration and its media allies for their attempts to spin the unspinnable, highlighting the absurdity of their justifications. His commentary resonated with a broad audience, capturing the disillusionment felt by many who had once viewed Democrats as the moral counterweight to Republican excesses. The media's role in this saga was particularly egregious. Outlets that had built their reputations on holding power to account suddenly transformed into Biden's unofficial public relations team. Rather than challenging the pardon's implications, they amplified the administration's talking points, downplaying the contradiction between Biden's words and actions. When emotional appeals failed to quell the backlash, they resorted to whataboutism, pointing to former President Donald Trump's pardons, such as one involving his daughter's father-in-law, as a way to normalize Biden's actions. This false equivalence was a desperate tactic, one that ignored the fundamental issue. Accountability is not a partisan concept. Two wrongs do not make a right, and the media's failure to uphold this principle only deepened public mistrust. The timing of the pardon added another layer of suspicion. Rather than being announced alongside other executive actions to dilute its impact, it was dropped abruptly, catching even political allies off guard. This lack of strategic foresight suggested either panic or arrogance, as if the administration believed the public would simply move on. Yet, the opposite occurred. The pardon became a lightning rod for criticism, uniting voices across the political spectrum in their condemnation. Even some Democrats who had initially rallied behind Biden began to distance themselves, recognizing the damage to their party's credibility. At its core, the pardon was more than a legal maneuver. It was a symbolic act that exposed the fragility of the administration's moral authority. Democrats had spent years positioning themselves as the antithesis of corruption, wielding the rule of law as a weapon against their opponents. They had condemned Republicans for bending ethical norms, accusing them of undermining democratic institutions. Yet, when faced with a test of their own principles, they faltered. The pardon was not just a personal decision, but a public statement, one that suggested the rules applied differently to those in power. This double standard was not lost on the American public, who saw it as yet another example of the elite playing by a separate set of rules. The broader implications of this decision are troubling. By pardoning his son, Biden set a precedent that could embolden future administrations to act with impunity. If the president's family can be shielded from accountability, what message does that send to the public? What prevents other leaders from using executive power to protect their own interests? The normalization of such actions risks eroding the foundation of justice, turning it into a privilege reserved for the powerful. This is not a hypothetical concern, but a tangible threat to the democratic principles that underpin the nation. There is an argument to be made that Biden's decision was driven by love for his son, a natural instinct for any parent. Some might contend that, given the opportunity, any father would use their authority to protect their child. Yet, this perspective ignores the larger context. Biden is not an ordinary parent, but the leader of a nation, entrusted with upholding the public's trust. Allowing Hunter to face the consequences of his actions would have been a painful but powerful demonstration of integrity. It would have shown that justice applies equally, even to those closest to power. Instead, Biden chose a path that prioritized personal loyalty over public duty, undermining the very system he had sworn to protect.